Welcome to Morningstar Christian Chapel YouTube channel. Please remember to hit that subscribe button, like button, and the notification bell so you can find out when we go live or post a new video. And be sure to leave a comment about what God has shown you in this message. Thanks, and enjoy the study.
Well, shall we open our Bibles this morning to the Gospel of Luke chapter 8, verse 26. I was looking, this is our 33rd week in Luke. We will never finish this book, I'm telling you. The Lord will be back. Well, anyway, slow is better than fast, I guess. We are currently in the second year of Jesus' public ministries where the crowds are just overwhelming, but the opposition is now planning to have Jesus killed one way or the other. The only thing really keeping them back is they're afraid of the reaction of the crowds, which are for Jesus in every way. When we started chapter 8 a couple of weeks ago, we told you that the first 39 verses of this chapter all happen in one day. We know that just from the chronology of the other Gospels. And so as the Lord in verse 1 through 15 or so saw the size and as the crowds began to grow, the Lord began to speak in parables. We talked about what parables were, and ultimately it was a way for the Lord to reveal clearly to those who were hungry for his ways the truth of what he was trying to teach. It clarified. But for those in the crowd, like the Pharisees, who didn't want to hear it at all, it kind of kept them from being fully culpable because it kind of hid the truth from them. So the Lord told the first parable, the one of the sower and the condition of the heart. He said in Mark 4:13, if you understand this one, then you'll understand all of them. And indeed, that's really the key. It's the only one that's explained. And so we use that to understand all of the parables that we find in the Gospels. And then the Lord turned and last week began to speak about, since we don't know the condition of people's hearts, the thing that we can do is to let the Lord's light shine in our lives personally, let that fruit begin to grow. And as we go out into the world and not knowing who we're up against, we can certainly, by the light shining in our lives, be able to have people turn and begin to wonder where they stand with God and what the Lord could do in their lives so that the Lord's word could be a light. And we quit in verse 25 last week. We ended actually with Jesus at the end of a long day saying to the disciples, Mark 4:35, I think, get in the boat and let's go over the other side. And you remember the story. Jesus went to sleep. The boys began to sail, if you will. Storm came up, a rogue storm. It scared fishermen. They thought they were going to die. They woke up Jesus with the words, teacher, don't you care that we're dying, perishing? Matthew tells us that before the Lord did anything about it, he said, how come you're so fearful? Such little faith. Stilled the waves and the seas, spoke to them, and everything went calm. And again, he turned back to his disciples and says, where's your faith? Verse 25, the disciples looked at each other and says, who's this guy? Even the waves and the seas and the winds obey him. And so we left them there in the water, if you will. This morning, we want to turn to the next story. In fact, in verse 26, we read, then they sailed to the country of the Gadarenes, which is opposite of Galilee. And when he stepped out onto the land, there met him a certain man from the city who had had demons for a long time. He wore no clothes, nor did he live in the house, but he lived in the tombs. If you leave the Sea of Galilee at Capernaum on the west and you go east across the Sea of Galilee, it'll take you about 6.5 miles to reach shore again. And you'll hit town today it's called Kurzi. We stopped there on our Israel tour. It is at the base of the Golan Heights. The name of the place was Gadara or Geseren. There's a couple of names for the same place, biblically as well as historically. They are old cities of the Decapolis. The Decapolis were 10 very large cities, mostly Gentiles in the north. There were 208 cities in all that had a population large enough to be made on a map in those days. But these were the larger cities, if you will. The ruins of them, of this city are still there. It is the only place around the Sea of Galilee, Gadara, where there are very steep cliffs that fall down into the sea. Everything else around the Sea of Galilee is pretty rolling hills and easy to have access, and you can just walk there. But this place, you'd die if you weren't careful. So Jesus has just crossed a very stormy sea. He had ministered to his disciples who had woken him up in fear. They learned he was the Lord over nature. They were about to learn he's the Lord over everything else as well. So when they land, they're in Gadara on the eastern side of the lake towards the Golan Heights. Here comes running a man. And we read in the other Gospels, and by the way, this is the only one of the, well, I shouldn't say the only, this is one story that is covered in all three of the synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the ones that see together. John is very different. So they all covered this story, Matthew 8, Mark 5, and here. And immediately upon landing, this man from the tombs comes running, a man that used to live there in the city. Mark tells us that he just saw Jesus afar off, hadn't even landed there at the docks, and he was already running to the docks. And then we are given a little bit more information in Matthew chapter 8, which says that there were two men who lived in the tombs. And yet somehow this one man just kind of disappears. He came with him, he ran towards Jesus, and then he disappeared. Like the original Tomb Raiders, I guess. But what an interesting picture. You know, the Lord is there. It seems from everything we read in the Gospels, the only reason he made this trip late in the day across the lake, risking this whole storm, was to get to this one guy. Didn't really stay for anything else, wasn't really welcome for anything else. But he came for this one man, which tells me that other guy had every opportunity to be made right with God. Jesus is there, his healing is there, his will is there, and yet somehow he just doesn't hang around. And so one in despair meets the Lord and is delivered. The other, in his despair, runs away. And I thought, gosh, how close he was to God's answer. We see that sometimes in church. People come to church, at least some folks do, when there's tremendous difficulty in their life. They'll tell the most horrifying stories. You'll sit and listen, just want to go, I'm sorry. And you just can almost see the Lord, preparing them to give them life. And what happens is they'll come, and then whatever issue gets cleared up, and they're back out the door. They don't come back. They don't have a hunger for the Lord. They have a hunger for just deliverance. And so, or they don't agree with what Jesus has to say, but they come in despair, and they leave in despair. But some come in despair, and they're not disappointed because the Lord is always faithful. So here's what the three accounts tell us of this man, not the one who disappeared. That's all we know. One verse, Matthew chapter 8, I think it's verse 28. But for the other man, the one that we're going to deal with, it said here in Luke, he had demons in his life, possessing his life for a long time. We are told that he had a home that he lost. He had a family that is no longer with him. He was forced to live in isolation in a graveyard, holed up in the abandoned burial chambers that are still to this day found in those hills. We are told in Mark chapter 8 that he was an extremely violent guy who wouldn't even allow people to pass along the road, that people just avoided the area, that he had unbelievable kind of demonic powers. We'll read here in a couple of verses that he could tear himself out of the shackles and the chains that they tried to restrain him in, that he was untamable, that he would shriek. It's a horrible Greek word. It literally means to scream at the top of your lungs in anguish because he was being tortured by these demons. He would cut himself with stones, Mark tells us in chapter 5, and he would even be driven sometimes to just run around naked into the wilderness. I mean, the fella had just been out of control. He's lost his senses. He's self-destructive. He's suffering tremendously. He's scarred for life in many ways. This is a man that you look at and you say, this is a work of hell in progress. This is what the devil would like to do. And there's an important picture here, because on the one hand, it's an accurate picture of man's helplessness to stand up against his spiritual enemy, the devil. But it is also a fair and a very revealing picture of what the devil would like to do to you if he was given the chance. Usually it's the devil works with deceit. He works with, subtlety. He comes like an angel of light, and you're fooled by him. But this is who he really is. This is what he'd really like to accomplish. This is the will of the enemy against man if God would allow it. To harass, to destroy, to hurt, to oppose. It is Satan's plan. It is what he would like to do. It is why you are told in Ephesians chapter 6, beginning in verse 10, finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. Put on the whole armor of God so that you might be able to stand against the wiles, or if you will, the willies of the devil. And having done all to stand, because you're not wrestling against flesh and blood, but you're wrestling against principalities and powers and rulers of the darkness of this age, spiritual wickedness in high places and all. And so there is a battle. Now, fortunately, if you're a Christian this morning, then the Holy Spirit lives in you. 1 John 4, verse 4 says, greater is he that's in you than he that's in the world. So, Christians can't be demon-possessed. I watch some churches that, they'll teach this, a Christian can be demon-possessed, and it's an easy way out. So if you're an overeater, if you have a problem with gluttony, they'll say, well, you just have a spirit of gluttony, we'll cast it out. Well, that would be easier for me. Just cast that demon out, man, I'll stop eating. Rather than I might have to have some discipline and stop eating, I like to eat, pretty much. Or there's lust in your life. Hey, I got that demon of lust. Well, that'd be great if that's all it was. But it's not what it is. It's sin that dominates the heart. But look, if Jesus moves into your life, the devil can't. The Lord doesn't rent out a room. You're his house. And so greater is he that's in you. But that doesn't mean the enemy doesn't come to discourage or try to defeat you or oppose you or mislead you or cast doubt or hate or selfishness. But it's important that you realize there's an enemy here. And this is the enemy unveiled, so to speak. This poor man living the ways that he has lived. Your enemy's not your boss. Enemy's not your wife. I guess your enemy could be your children. No, that's not true. Or the red light. Or the bad driver. Your enemy is spiritual, and so are the weapons that God has given you. But look, before we came to Jesus, we're all this guy, aren't we? We're all controlled by the enemy. We're all driven by the lust of our flesh. We're all living in darkness. We think we have an answer. We can't get out of it ourselves. The Lord has to come rescue us. And so it's a pretty typical gospel story, but it reveals a lot, shows us a lot of what was going on. Well, we read in verse 28 that when he saw Jesus, he cried out, fell down before him, with a loud voice said, what have I to do with you, Jesus, the Son of the Most High God? I beg you, do not torment me. For he had commanded the unclean spirit to come out of this man. He had often seized him, kept him under guard, bound him with chains and shackles, broke the bonds, and was even driven by the demons into the wilderness. And so here's this confrontation. He comes running to Jesus, identifies who he is, and really basically asked for mercy, which is interesting considering what he's been doing to this man all of his life. Now, whenever you see in the world, in literature and movies, the battle or the confrontation between God and the enemy, there is always this struggle. Like, I hope he wins. I hope the guy with the white hat, or the fella who's on the good side would win. But look, when it comes to the Lord and the devil, there's no battle here. It's all, Satan's on his face. He can destroy until Jesus shows up. And then he's whimpering and he's, please, and leave me alone. And this isn't a battle. The enemy comes to steal and to kill and to destroy, but Jesus came to give life more abundantly. So, Satan's not your friend. Look at that here. He's not your friend. Hell is going to be horrible. But God can deliver you. Now notice in verse 28 the reaction of the demons in this man as Jesus arrives. They run, they fall down, they acknowledge him. The word fall down is proskuneo. It's a word that means to fall before a king or to honor a higher authority in your life. So this man runs, and the demons acknowledge the Lord had come. He cries out. Again, that's the word for shrieked. It is that top of your lungs crying out. I suspect, just looking at the picture, that the disciples might have thought at this point, let's just get back on the boat and go. I know there's a storm out there, but this is worse. I want out of here. You can just imagine this confrontation. What have I to do with you, Jesus, the Son of the Most High God? They acknowledge who Jesus is because they know who he is. Don't torment us. Oh, you're okay tormenting others. The demons recognize Jesus' authority, and they oftentimes in the Gospels identify quickly who he is and then subjugate themselves to him to await further instructions. You might go back and read Luke chapter 4 on that Sabbath evening when everyone came to Peter's house and the Lord began to heal all that were sick and those who were possessed by the devil, it says, and he cast these demons out of them. But you will read there in chapter 4 that they begin to shriek out, "You're the Christ, the Son of the Son of God." And Jesus always stopped them because he doesn't want their testimony. He doesn't need it. He doesn't need the devil working for him in that regard. So he usually stops them from saying much more than that. But here again, they identify who is, which ought to tell you when James writes in chapter 2, the demons also believe in God and they tremble. You should take it to heart that believing in Jesus is not enough. The devil believed in Jesus. Totally. Went on his face right before the Lord. "You're the Lord, have mercy." They just never submitted themselves to him. They rebelled against him. So you can agree, I believe in Jesus, great. Enough to obey him? To let him be the Lord of your life? Because if not, he's going to be the Lord sooner or later. Matthew tells us that they added, and Matthew tells us what Luke doesn't write down, that they said to the Lord, "Don't torment us before our time." So these demons were not only aware of who Jesus was, but also that in time, they were going to have to answer for the decisions that they've made. There was a judgment. It was coming, that judgment would be soon, and that judgment would be before Jesus. They knew who they were going to have to answer to. And I would say that in that regard, they're smarter than some of the people in the world who never think about they're going to stand before Jesus one day. And they're not going to have any representation except unless the Lord stands up for them. They're going to go on their own, boy, I don't want to even think about it. Are we ready to give an answer for our lives? Well, don't torment us. Well, Jesus responded to these demons speaking out of this man's mouth. And he said in verse 30, "What's your name?" And they said, "Legion," because many demons had entered into him. And they begged him that he would not command them to go down into the abyss. The word legion is a term for a Roman legion, which consisted of 6,000 men. Now, I'm not so sure this guy has 6,000 demons living in him, because the devil's just a liar, so exaggeration would be right up his alley. But you do read "they" and "them" in the next few verses, and the fact that according to Mark, there were over 2,000 pigs living on the side of the hill, and they all got chased down a cliff, that there might have been a lot. One would be horrible. 2 would be hopeless. I don't know what hundreds would be. But notice a couple of other things. They recognize Jesus. They bow to him. "Please, be merciful to us. Don't judge us before our time." And then this request, "Don't send us to the abyss." The Greek word for abyss is abuso. It is translated the bottomless pit in the Bible. It is a couple of things that we know about it from Revelation chapter 9. It is where countless demons will come forth for 5 months during the Great Tribulation to hurt those who are still dwelling upon the earth. It will be a place, or is a place, where there are certain demons who, according to Genesis 6, left their first estate, and they were particularly vile, and they were chained in the abuso until the judgment day. It is also the place that, according to the Bible, Satan will be chained for 1,000 years during that millennial reign of Jesus. So they know where they're headed. They know where the judgment is. And maybe the typical practice was that if Jesus dealt with demons, that's where they were sent, because that's their question. Don't send us to the abuso. And then they add, according to Mark 5, and don't send us out of the area here either. Whatever was going on in that area, they seemed to feel like they were very productive there. But I love the picture of my Lord's authority. People go, the devil. Well, the devil's nothing. I'll just hide behind Jesus and make faces at him. but I'm going to hide behind Jesus. There was a kid that lived down the street from us when I was in 4th grade who literally beat up every kid on the block. He was like 8'10", or so it seemed. And he just hit you just for fun. But whenever my dad walked me to school, I made faces at the kid. Hey, I don't care about you, because Dad was with me. So I feel like that about Jesus being with me too. I'm not messing with the devil. I want anything to do with him, but I know that the Lord will handle that problem if it shows up. But I love it. This this battle is not uncertain. This battle is not undecided. If you're on your own, you're going to lose. But between the Lord and Satan, it's hardly a contest. Look at these awful spirits that had made this man's life miserable. And the minute Jesus shows up, that's over with. So please don't send us to the abuso. And we read in verse 32, now there was a herd of many swine feeding there on the mountain. And they begged him that he would permit them to enter them, and he permitted them. And then the demons went out of the man, entered the swine. The herd ran violently down the steep place into the lake and drowned. We read in Mark that when they made this request, Jesus just had one word. He just said, go. Go. And tells us, Mark does, 5:13, that 2,000 head of swine, that's a lot of pigs, by the way, ran down this only place on the lake that you can still find that cliff, and they quickly drowned. And I don't know what happened to the demons then. I guess they got to send them to the abuso. A couple of things to just keep in mind as we watch the Lord's ministry. This was in one of the Decapolis cities, one of the Big 10 cities, which were largely Gentile influence in northern Israel. But here the indications are that Jesus, who came first to the Jews, had come upon a Jewish community overrun by the Gentiles, and they were now engaged in raising pigs, which, by the way, even from a law standpoint, was absolutely unacceptable to the Lord. This was contrary to the law of Leviticus 11, I think Deuteronomy 14 maybe. It was also contrary to the heart that God had for them. They were involved in a worldly way, if you will, to get ahead. If that is true, and it does seem to be so, then when we get to verse 37 in a moment, and the whole city comes out and asks Jesus to leave, you can kind of get the feel that, their whole industry was destroyed in a moment's time. These demons that were now allowed to go into these pigs destroyed an entire operation, if you will. The demons were given the red light. The herd ran down the cliff in terror. They quickly drowned. The old joke, right, about deviled ham. But anyway, there it goes. So we read in verse 34, I'm sorry. When those who fed them saw what had happened, they fled and told it into the city and into the country. And then they went out to see what had happened and came to Jesus, found the man, whom we haven't talked much about yet, from whom the demons had departed, sitting at the feet of Jesus. He was clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. And they also who had seen it told them what had happened and by what means this demon-possessed man had been healed. Now, if you're a laborer and you're taking care of somebody's crop, or in this case, a flock, and all of a sudden that entire industry gets run off a cliff, you're going to run to the city as fast as you can to go, I didn't do it. I didn't touch them. I didn't spook them. Not my fault. The ruin of the city, if you go today to Kersey, the city is about a half a mile from the cliffs. So the people kind of lived up the hills there in the Golan Heights, but everyone else would, kind of migrate down towards where the road was. So I don't know how long it took them to get there, but it wasn't long before the owners and the concerned parties came running out. And what do they see? They see Jesus, and they see this guy that's kept people from the road, who's always screaming in the middle of the night, who everyone's afraid of and everyone knows about. And he's sitting by Jesus, and he's got clothes on. He seems normal again. And it terrified them. Their only reaction with this man over the course of the many years was to get the biggest guy in town to see if they could, chain him up. You try it. Send Bubba, and Bubba would go. But that was about it. It never lasted for very long. But now they hear from eyewitness testimony what had happened, and they come out and they have a reaction. Now, you would think that their reaction would be, wow, he's better. What did you do? Did you feed him something? You have a drug? No, I just spoke to him. They should have had tremendous interest in Jesus. I think if all things were equal, you would have said, can you wait right here? I got to go get my wife. She's sick, and I don't want her to be sick. Maybe you could help her. Or I'm going to get my neighbor or my child. But that's not at all what you hear. By the way, that's what the Samaritans did in John chapter 4 when there was that woman at the well. She went, told everybody what the Lord had told her about her life. They had come and heard for themselves. And then they said to Jesus, could you stay here? And they went and got the whole city out. And then the city came out and said, could you stay a few days? Well, of course they could. That's exactly what you would have. But you don't read that here. You don't read it here at all. In fact, you read in verse 37, then the whole multitude of the surrounding region of the Gadarenes asked Jesus to leave, for they were seized with great fear. They just wanted him away. What were they afraid of? Well, I think they realized they were dealing with someone that was more powerful than they, had greater authority. And their commitment, their lifestyle, was one that they knew violated his plans. So they're not ready to repent. They certainly don't want to change. Their lifestyle was more important to them than the power that restored this man's life. Their sinful ways exposed to them were of less value than their concern over their financial loss. And so they said to Jesus, you got to leave. You're disrupting the whole deal here. It's almost like there are two possessions here. There's the man who's possessed by the demon whom the Lord delivered. And then there's a bunch of townspeople possessed with greed and blindness to sin, profit over deliverance. That's all that mattered to them. And they don't even move by the example of someone delivered as fierce as someone who had lived in their graveyard for quite some time. It's like the old Guns N' Roses, if you got the money, honey, we got your disease. And they were willing to take that disease over the deliverance that God could give them. It's an amazing thing. The thing they feared the most was the threat of Jesus to their way of life. He frightened them, but not enough to have them repent. And so this is what they say, you got to leave. You got to leave. And then maybe the saddest part, verse 37, the last sentence says, and so Jesus got in the boat and left. They got rid of him. Their commitment was to their selfish way of life. How sad is that? Now, here's the truth. If you don't want Jesus in your life, he'll leave. He wouldn't like to stay. He's got life for you. He traveled across the lake at the end of a day, tired as could be, risking, a storm just so he could come to help this guy. But if you're not interested, no argument from Jesus. You don't hear Jesus doing this. I've got First Amendment rights. Sorry. He's not kicking in the door. He's not arguing he's got a better way of life for you if you'll just listen. He just turns and leaves. He'd knocked. They weren't willing to open. Did he leave with sadness? I'm sure. But we certainly make a great mistake when we try to twist people's arms about getting saved. Look, God will make his move, and then it'll be your move. So the church, we declare, he saves. We proclaim, he delivers. If you're willing to be delivered, God is willing to deliver you. No one who comes to me, John chapter 6, will I cast away. The door is always open, but it swings both ways. Somebody left our church a while back, and they go, I don't like it here. I said, well, that's fine. Go somewhere else. You don't pay to get in, you don't have to pay to get out. You can come in, you can leave. What can I do about that? Hopefully you'll find your place. Same thing with this guy and with this city. It appears Jesus came just for this man, but he also wanted to reach the city. And the Lord will meet you where you live, and he'll deliver you from sin. If you're willing, he's willing. But if you're not, he won't trouble you any further. So we read in verse 38 that the man from whom the demons had departed began to beg Jesus that he might go with him. And Jesus sent him away. He said, "Go to your own house. Tell what great things God has done for you." And so he went his way. He proclaimed through the whole city what great things God had done for him. What a great picture. A whole crowd of people going, "Go away." And one guy going, "I want to go with you. I'll lay down my life for you. Look at me. I'm changed because of you." And Jesus said, "No." Just point that out to you now. It's the only place in the gospel where someone says, "Lord, I want to go with you." And he says, "No." Usually, "Yeah, follow me." Why? Because though this city was done with Jesus, Jesus wasn't given up that quickly on the city. But he'd leave them a man as a witness. Go tell them the great things God has done for you. Every time they see you walking around town, they're going to remember this day. Every time they hear your testimony, they're going to be encouraged. You'll be my light in a very dark place. And I suspect that one day you're going to get to heaven, you're going to meet some Gadarene folks. Gadareans? Yeah, well, whatever they are. From Gadara. Gadarenes. You'll meet some of those folks that are there because of the fruit of this man of the tombs. Literally, any ministry you ever start should start at home first, because they're the ones that can see the change in your life the most. My dad, 12 years I witnessed to him. Well, 6 years we didn't talk. He was so mad that I wasted a Catholic education that cost him an arm and a leg, he thought, and got saved instead. And for 12 years we argued. And then he said this to me the day he got saved: "I can't argue with the fact your life's been changed." And I was an idiot still, so I don't know. But, the Lord made a distinction. It's always good when you go to the people that know you best, because they'll see even the minute changes, it'll stick out like a sore thumb. Go home first. The method of evangelism is this: look at what great things God has done in my life. In fact, if you go read the story in Mark chapter 5, verse 19, the Lord adds the words, "Tell them what great things God has done for you, comma, and the compassion he's had upon you." Tell them what God has done for you. Tell them how much he loves you. Go do that. And in the Mark, at least, report, it said that the man departed, went to the city, and then it says he went through all of the Decapolis, and that's what the word is used there. So he literally goes to all these large Gentile cities with walls and industries, and he walks around and he tells everybody what the Lord has done for him and how much God loved me. And it says they marveled. Literally, it blew their minds. They just couldn't, did they marvel enough to get saved? I don't know. But I know this: as you've gone through the Decapolis, this man in your Bible becomes the first missionary in the Bible to the Gentiles, as God sends them forth. As a believer, we're kind of like this guy. I want to go with Jesus. I can't wait for the Lord to come. I want to get out of this place. And I'm sure he'd like to get you out of this place. But he has better ideas. He'd like to get some of the place and go with you. So he puts you in a job that you hate. I hate it here. No one loves the Lord like I do. I'm just stuck. Yeah, you're stuck because that's where you're supposed to be telling them what God has done. We'll see. The Lord can use you. I need witnesses in this dark place in which you live. I'm going to put you there. Unfortunately, there's always some folks who, like the second man at the tombs, walk away before they ever see what God can do. And that would be horrible. If God has delivered you, you're like this man of the tombs. You're supposed to go to the city and to this country and to the world and tell people, here's what God's done for me, and this is how much he loves me. Or you're that second guy. Never gets to hear any of it, though he was that close to getting well. Don't miss out. Jesus is still fixing lives if you'll let him. Father, thank you this morning for your word to us. It is amazing to just read these stories and to see the reactions and to recognize that things haven't changed much. The devil is still out to destroy. Man is still out to serve himself. Even great proof of who you are is often met with resistance and ignorance. And though we have proof of what you can do, we somehow won't allow you to do it in us. But Lord, like never before, the church needs to be shining. The world seems to be falling apart. Never seen so many killings in a short amount of time, and yet can't help but wonder, Lord, if we don't want anything to do with you, maybe you're just taking your hands up and letting things go and the enemy running wild. And we need you, Lord. We need to stand behind you. We need you to protect us. We need your presence of your Spirit. So may you send us out of these doors telling others what you've done for us, how much you love us, how you've shown us that love. And may you go before us so that these others who are trapped in the life of an enemy who has blinded them and wants to destroy them will meet your Son, who will give them life and freedom and set them free to look forward to eternity. Use us, Lord, to deliver a message that needs to be heard like never before.